We're going to begin with a psalm.
My parents were, European and wasn't a girlfriend. But then I married an Israeli, so I learned.
Psalm 121. Shir l'malais eseinai el harim yain yava yezri ezrim imadino yisei shamayim ba'aretz al yitein lameit raglecha al yanum shemrecha hine leyanum v'layishan shem Yisrael Adonai shemrecha Adonai tzilcha yaniminecha Yayim Hashemesh lo yakeka v'yarech b'layla Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra yishmas nafshecha Adonai yishmatzeicha v'yecha me'ata v'yadeilam. A song of ascents. I lift my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help will come from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot falter. Your guardian does not slumber. Indeed, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your protective shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your going and your coming from now and from all time. The Lunch and Learn has been dedicated by Marcia and her children to the memory of beloved husband Moshe Lev and father Moshe Lev ben Avram on the occasion of his 25th.
Michael.
On the occasion of his 25th yahrzeit, may his neshama have an aliyah. The neshama should be elevated, and the ultimate aliyah from the neshama is when Mashiach comes and the neshamas, the souls of the departed, return back into their bodies and are reunited with us. So may this class, the study of Torah, and the tzedakah given for the class be a merit for his neshama.
Amen. Wonderful God.
We're up to the last paragraph on the page. There are 4 types of charity givers. It sounds like it's saying there are 4 people who give charity, but there are 4 different attitudes. But yet one of these 4, the last one, is someone who says that he who desires that he himself should not give, and that others too should not give. He is a wicked man. So it's someone who doesn't give. So commentators ask, how could it talk about 4 types of charity givers? One of the 4 is not a giver. Actually, 2 of the 4. Number 2 rather, he who wishes that others should give, but he himself should not give. Well, he's not a giver, obviously. So there you could say, well, he's not a giver, but he encourages others to give. But the last category doesn't give at all and doesn't want others to give either. So one of the commentators say it doesn't really mean 4 types of charity givers. We're talking about 4 attitudes towards the giving of charity. The Rebbe says it much more simply, that we're not talking about people who don't give charity. Ethics of the Fathers was not addressed to people who don't do what is basic requirements of Judaism, which includes giving tzedakah. We're talking about someone who wants to go to a higher level. So what are we talking about? Not 4 attitudes about people who give or don't give. We're talking about people who give, but their attitude towards the giving is what distinguishes one category from another. It's the attitude. The Alshich, one of the great Bible commentators who lived a little over 400 years ago in Tzfat, in Israel, Rabbi Moshe Alshich, as he was called, he says something very powerful. He says, the truth is, even the Jew who doesn't give, who's labeled the Rasha, the wicked one, even he or she is really a giver of tzedakah, deep down. Because one of the things that identify a Jew as a Jew, the Talmud says, actually 2 of the 3 things is that the person is a kind person, someone who has kindness and compassion. So by definition, if someone is a Jew, they have kindness. We can't say that about every human being. I'm not going to say that about the terrorists, that deep down they're kind people. They're evil people who've been consumed by their evil. But we're talking about every Jew, even a Jew who doesn't express the kindness, deep down has that kindness. In fact, Maimonides, yes?
You say automatically a Jewish guy, if he doesn't give tzedakah, is a bad guy?
Well, if you don't give tzedakah, that's not a good thing.
I would not say he's a bad guy. I might say he's a cheap guy.
No.
But not a bad guy.
Well, if a Jew doesn't follow the commandments, that's bad. That's a negative. Doesn't mean that there's nothing else about the person that's positive. No. But that's a negative thing. A person who's not kind, who doesn't give tzedakah is a bad person in that respect.
Yeah, but it could be a cheap guy who doesn't want to give tzedakah. It doesn't make it a bad person, a bad...
Being cheap is not an excuse.
It's any different than saying, fine, I'll give it, and then he gives it. Like,
Right, there are people who do it begrudgingly. We'll soon talk about the begrudgingly approach. But a person who doesn't give at all, which may be labeled as a rasha, but deep down that person really wants to give. It's only that person didn't have an opportunity to express their kindness. I told the story many times. I'll tell it very quickly. Of once a group of Hasidic leaders were gathered together in a town to collect money for a Jewish family that was taken hostage, talking about hostages. And the person who threw them into the dungeon was a landowner whose rent the family did not pay in many months. So he throws them into the dungeon and demands a payment of the rent, otherwise he would let them just rot there. So these rabbis are gathered together and they're drawing up a list of people to visit to collect money for this cause. And the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was there, and he says, why did you leave out the name of the richest man in town? So he says, the man is notorious as a miser. He doesn't give anything. Actually, he does give a copper coin, and people just throw it back at him. You know, you come for a donation from the wealthiest man, from a tycoon, and all he can give is a nickel, a rusty nickel. It's an insult. So people just throw it back at him. And no one bothers to ever ask him for any charity. They know they're not going to get anything. So the Alter Rebbe says, if you don't go to him first, I'm not going to join with you. And they say, well, we're wasting precious time. This family is languishing in the dungeon. Why don't you just realize that you're going to waste your time? You're going to get a rusty nickel. So the Alter Rebbe says, look, you want me to participate? You have to go to him first. So they had no other choice, so they come to this rich man, they knock on the door, the man sees these rabbis, these distinguished rabbis there, he's very flattered, and he says, what can I do for you? And the Alter Rebbe says, well, we're collecting money for a family that's languishing in a dungeon, and we need so many, let's say 100 rubles, and we're asking you to contribute. He says, sure, I'd be very happy, and he takes out this rusty nickel, and he gives it to the Alter Rebbe. And the other rabbis are rolling their eyes. You know, we told you, so why didn't you listen to us? And the Alter Rebbe gives him a dirty look and turns to this rich man. He says, thank you so much. He thanks him profusely for the kindness that he showed by giving this nickel. And the Alter Rebbe says, okay, let's go. Have a nice day. And no sooner do they make a few steps that the man says to the rabbi, come back. I'm going to give you more. And he gives him a few rubles. And this repeats itself every time they leave, after praising this man profusely, he calls him back until he gave the entire amount. And the Alter Rebbe explained that this man had a trait of kindness deeply embedded in his soul, but he never had the opportunity to express it, because every time when he gave that nickel, which wasn't easy for him the first time because he was a miser, he was truly a miser. He couldn't part with his money. So he never had a chance to express his kindness because people just threw it back at him. But I allowed him to express kindness, even if it was a minimal amount. It opened up a well of kindness, little by little, until he finally was able to do what he had to do. So, yes, there are misers, there are people who are incapable of expressing kindness, but deep down they have that sense of kindness in them. You just have to give them an opportunity to express that kindness. That's why we always say, don't put down a person who gives tzedakah for the wrong reason. There is no such thing as the wrong reason for giving tzedakah. Number one, does the poor person who doesn't have the money to pay his rent, does it make a difference to him if the money you give him for his rent was given for pure reasons, pure motives, or for selfish reasons? He has the money to pay the rent. He has the money to put food on his table. So if you think about tzedakah as the needs of the needy, it makes no difference what your intentions are. What makes the difference is that you're helping that person. That's number one. Number two, even if you do it for the most selfish reasons, for the least pure reasons, deep down you're doing it for the right reason. And if you allow the person to express the kindness for the wrong reason, it'll gradually allow the person to feel what is going on deep down, and you'll do it eventually for the right reason. Yes?
It was 2001, something, November, December. After September 11, was in Buffalo, was one mosque had fire. What reasons, how it's happened, doesn't matter in this situation, but call me synagogue, and they collect money to help Muslim people to restore mosque. I say, did Jewish people put fire in mosque? No. Did Muslim people help in something Jewish people? No. Why you ask me? And I didn't give. I'm right or not?
I don't want to get into that. That's a little bit off the subject. Maybe at the end, I'll try to address that.
Yeah, but it was exactly after September 11.
Right.
1 month, a month, or maybe 2 months later, call me about to help.
Okay, I understand. Maybe I'll address it later. Okay, so the first category is he who wishes to give, but that others should not give. You have people who love to give, they love to contribute, but they want to be the only one. Let's say there's a campaign for a certain need, the synagogue needs repairs, and there's one very wealthy guy who says, I'm going to give the entire amount, don't collect from anyone else. Is that good or bad?
Not good.
That's the first category. Someone who wants to give, but doesn't want others to give. So the question is, what is going on? Let's analyze this person psychologically. What is going on? You can't say the person is not kind, is not generous. They're very generous. In fact, they want to give all the money. So what is missing over there? What's missing is that this person needs to feel that they are unique, that they are better than everyone else. There's a tremendous amount of ego, of arrogance in this person who says, I will do it myself, I don't want anyone else to participate. The best way of giving tzedakah is to give and to influence others to give as well, and to be happy with others. But this person begrudges. There's an English word, begrudging. When you begrudge someone means you don't feel comfortable with the other person also achieving. You want to be the only achiever. And this is not only with regard to tzedakah, it could be with regard to wisdom. Someone who tries to show that they know everything. And in a classroom, you have a kid who's always raising his hand. He knows the answer to everything, and he doesn't want to let any other kid answer because he has to show that I am so smart and I have everything.
I like this kind of kid.
This is okay.
It depends what his motivation is. If the motivation is, I want to show that I'm smarter than everyone and I don't want anyone else to show how smart they are, then what you're doing is you're showing that you're doing the mitzvah. Yes, you're doing the mitzvah, you're giving, we're talking about tzedakah, you're giving, you're helping the poor person, but you're doing it strictly for your own self, for your own ego. That means the mitzvah becomes a vehicle for your own ego, for your own ego trip. That's a negative. It's better than not giving at all, but it's still a negative because it shows that the mitzvah is not done for the right reason. So even though it's good to do a mitzvah for the wrong reason, ideally you should do it for the right reason. And the right reason is that you don't have to be the only one doing it. You can allow others to do it as well. There's stories told about on Purim you're supposed to give money to the poor. It's called matanos levyonim, gifts to the poor. And sometimes in Jewish communities, there are not too many poor people that we know of. So they tell the story. I don't know if it's a true story or it's just a joke. But there was this very wealthy man who found one poor Jew in the community. And nobody apparently knew about this person. So he gives him a nice donation on Purim. And he tells the man, please don't tell anybody that you're in this town, that you're poor, because I want to make sure that next year I have a poor person to give tzedakah to, so make sure nobody knows about you and nobody else helps you, because if everyone's going to help you, I won't have anyone to give tzedakah to. That's of course, it's a joke, but it's an illustration of this point. If someone feels the mitzvah is for my own greatness, for my own specialty, and it leads people to do mitzvahs in ways that actually turn out to be negative. I'll tell you this famous, it's also a joke, it's not serious, but it's the idea behind it is serious. This wealthy man has this big party, big birthday party, and there's a lot of food left over. And his wife, in those days they didn't have that much refrigeration, and the food is getting a little spoiled. So the wife was ready to take the food and throw it in the garbage. And the husband sees her, he says, what are you doing? She says, well, I'm throwing the food in the garbage. This food is doesn't smell right. And he says, that's a sin. There's a sin in the Torah to waste good food.
Good food.
Well, it's good enough. He said, there's a poor man down the street. His name is Yankel. And he hardly ever has any good food to eat. Bring it to him. He'll do a mitzvah. And she says, but it's not. The food may not be good. He says, you can't waste food. Do a mitzvah. So she brings the Yankel the food. He's very happy. Next day, she comes to her husband. She says, I wanted to tell you the bad news. Yankel got sick from food poisoning. Wow, I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. I'll visit the sick. It's a mitzvah to visit the sick. So he runs to Yankel and he visits the sick, and he really is nice to him and really shows him a lot of affection and support. And he comes home and he feels so good about himself. The next day, the wife comes to the husband, there's bad news. Yankel passed away. He says, wow, I have an opportunity to help bury the dead. His wife doesn't have any money for the funeral. I'm going to pay for the funeral. I'm going to go to the funeral personally. I'm going to deliver a eulogy. And then afterwards he says, now I can visit the mourners and comfort the mourners. And he turns to his wife, you almost made me lose all these mitzvahs. If I wouldn't have given the spoiled food to Yankel, I would have wasted food, I would have not fed the poor, not visited the sick, not buried the dead, and not comforted the mourners. That's an extreme example of how someone takes a mitzvah and turns it on its head to be all about yourself, about what I'm going to get out of it, not caring about the other people who don't benefit from you and who may even suffer because of the way you do your mitzvah. That's the category over here. One of the commentators, known as the Bartanura, says another reason why won't you want others to give? You're giving, you're a kind person, and you understand the importance of giving, so why do you care if someone else gives? So he says an interesting thing. It says in the Talmud, based on an interpretation of a biblical verse that when a person gives tzedakah, aser, when you give 10% of your income to tzedakah, the word aser, if you change the dot of the sin, of the letter sin, it turns into ashir. That when you give tzedakah, you become wealthy. God repays you measure for measure. So when you give tzedakah, you become rich. And sometimes you say, I'm going to give tzedakah because I want to be rich. But I don't want to have competition from all these other people. I don't want them to be rich. I want to be the only rich person around. Then he gives another simpler interpretation. He says, I'll give for you. So you mean well to protect your relatives. That's also a negative trait. Don't try to protect people who want to give tzedakah. Of course, there are some examples where I would tell people not to give. People who are so poor that if they give tzedakah, they're going to have to be helped by other people giving tzedakah. It goes in a circle. So you're helping someone who's going to, you're encouraging someone to give tzedakah, and you're going to have to help them, or going to get other people to help them because they can't afford to give. So there are exceptions to every rule, but as a general rule, you shouldn't be overly protective of your relatives who want to give tzedakah. Let them give because that will be good for them. Just a little anecdote. The Rebbe, in public gatherings, when they were in the weekdays, would make an appeal for tzedakah. And they would just hand out envelopes, and people would put whatever cash or check inside of it, and it would go for tzedakah. One time, in all the Rebbe's years of leadership, the Rebbe made an exception, and he said he wants to look at every envelope and see what everyone gave, and see if they gave enough. And he said, if you gave enough means more than you think you can give, you will be repaid many times over. But at least you'll get your money back. And the Rebbe started to open up envelopes, and he saw, let's say someone said $100. The Rebbe said, give 10 times as much. And they would give 10 times as much. And every person, there was only one person that the Rebbe said, I was satisfied with what he gave. My father, a blessed memory, was a rabbi then. His weekly income was about $100 a week. Actually, I once saw his paycheck, $115. And he wrote out a check for $36. Not too bad, a third of your weekly income. And the Rebbe looked at it, and he said, I can't even add to this, it's too little. So my father wrote out another check for $118, which is more than his weekly salary. And the Rebbe looked at it, I want you to give 10 times as much. 10 times as much. And my father didn't have the money. He paid it out during the year. That year, he made exactly back that amount. Now, how did he make back the money? He had more bar mitzvahs to officiate at, or more weddings, or lahavdil, more funerals. And he made every penny back. The Rebbe guarantees you, and the Torah guarantees you, that when you give tzedakah, you get it back. And sometimes a person says, well, I didn't get it back. Well, how much money did you save in not having to go to doctors and lawyers? I'm nothing against doctors and lawyers, but it's an expense that you'd rather not have to incur. Yes?
There's a Yiddish saying, isn't there, that God is a fair boss, but he's slow to pay the wage. That's one thing. Is that true?
Sometimes God takes his time. Yeah. We don't always see it in our image of when we should be getting it back, but God does give it to us. He does repay us.
I think it's a very, I know I've thought of it often, and it's very, it just rings very true, because it's not always in ways and times that I think, but I always seem to get by.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to say is that these modes of not giving or resistance to giving, in contrast to Olam Haba, where everyone will compete to see who can give the most in the ways that are, we will compete with one another in the future. Who can give more? It will be,
yes, competition will be in the next world. There's going to be a lot of competition, right?
In good ways. In good ways.
Now, the next category is the person who desires that he himself should give and that others should give. He is a pious man. The Hebrew word is the chassid. He's the one who goes beyond. He wants to give himself, and he wants that others should give. In Yiddish, there's a term called fargin. They turned it into Hebrew, lefargen. In English, there's no such word. There's the opposite, begrudging. When you give something begrudgingly, that's the opposite of fargining. In English, I looked it up. There is no opposite of begrudging. There's no antonym. There's no positive, the opposite of begrudging. They translate it as nice and sweet, but something only in Yiddish it makes sense to fargin someone. If you hear someone did well in business and in their health and in their knowledge, whatever it is, and you feel good about it. When someone tells you, you know so-and-so, he made a lot of money, he won the lottery. How do you feel? Do you feel, well, too bad it wasn't me. I would have preferred that I won the lottery. Or do you say, wow, I feel so good that that person won the lottery. It makes me feel good. That's called fargining in Yiddish. And again, there's no English word. I've never found an English word that really describes that feeling. Because maybe English language people who composed it never had that experience. I don't know. But it's like a positive feeling. That's what the chassid is. The chassid has a positive feeling about giving, but he also feels good when others give. He feels good because he wants others to also prosper, to benefit. Because when you give, that's the greatest benefit you can get. Not only is there a benefit in God returns the kindness by giving you wealth, it's much more than that. And I mentioned this many times, and it's based on the Talmud. When a person gives to a person who's in need, who benefits more? The one who receives the money or the one who gives the money? The answer is the one who gives it. Why? Because the one who receives it, it's a finite amount. Let's say the person needed $1,000, let's say even 100,000 or 1,000,000. 1,000,000 is still finite. It's still a limited amount. It's very easy to spend $1 million in one day. If you don't believe me, just give me the $1 million and I'll show you. It's very easy to exhaust whatever supplies you have, because it's all finite. The one who gives gets something that's infinite. Not just that it's a mitzvah, because there are a lot of mitzvahs, but you validated your very existence. The whole reason you came into this world that justifies your existence is because you're going to give to the other. Because God, when He created the world with a disparity, it's unfair. There are rich people, there are poor people, needy people, and people who have. Why did God do that? Because He wanted that we should participate in helping the needy. If God would give everyone what they need, or if, God forbid, there would ever be a true communist system where everyone shares equally in everything that there is in this world, we would not have to do any good for others because it's taken care of by the government. If that would happen, we wouldn't have a justification for our own existence. Why are we here? We're here to correct the imbalance. There's an imbalance in this world, and if we are the ones who have, we're required to make that imbalance go away and give those who don't have what they're entitled to. And therefore, tzedakah, the word tzedakah, does not mean charity. Tzedakah means righteousness. You're doing the right thing. You're righting the wrong. The wrong is the one that God does. God wronged the poor person in a certain sense, but he wants it to be corrected, and God could correct it Himself. But He says, no, I want you to be part of it. I want you to have the credit that you're doing my job, my work. And therefore, the poor person is giving the rich person much more than the rich person is giving the poor, no matter how much the rich person gives. So the person, the chassid, is the one who fargins, who really feels good when someone else gives, because when someone else gives, not only will they get rich materially, they'll get rewarded in kind, but they will also justify and validate their whole existence. If I can help someone validate their existence, that's the greatest gift I can give someone. Yes.
Does that apply if someone asks you for money to help with their business, and they're gonna pay you back, and then they don't pay you back? Which has happened to me twice.
Hashem is going to take care of it.
Lending money is a mitzvah, and some say, based on the Talmud, that it's a greater mitzvah than giving tzedakah for a whole sort of reasons. But if the person doesn't repay it, you can then claim it as tzedakah.
So there's spiritual merit to it.
Yeah.
In that regard, then,
Yeah.
Hey, Marsha, you there in the business.
if you have a contract with someone and you loan them money and they don't pay you, the repayment is spiritual. Is that
Right,
What
right.
happens if you work for somebody and you don't get paid? That's all.
That's another part. Yeah. That happened to you, I know.
Well, many times.
It's tzedakah.
It's especially with the Jewish kids.
Yeah, Rabbi, how do you explain that? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Not hearing the question.
How is it that some people don't repay, but they owe?
Yes.
How is it that people don't repay, but yet they
They receive
they
the.
hold all the other mitzvahs?
It reminded me of a story. Someone came to the rabbi with that very question. He said, I know a religious Jew, very religious Jew, who is dishonest in his business. So the rabbi says, well, I know a very religious Jew who eats pork every day. So the guy says, well, how could he be called very religious if he eats pork every day? The rabbi says, how could he be called religious if he cheats in his business? It's the same thing. But on the other hand, we're not perfect. And we're not consistent. And I wouldn't even call it hypocrisy. I always say this, that hypocrisy is when I'm putting on an act to fool you, to make you think that I'm religious, so that way I could cheat you because you trust me. That's a hypocrite. But if I do something good today, and tomorrow I fail to do good, am I a hypocrite? No, I'm inconsistent.
You're human.
Which is another way of saying I'm a human being, and I have a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, good inclination, evil inclination, and they're in a battle, they're in a struggle, and sometimes I win the battle, sometimes I may lose the battle. We try hard not to lose it, but sometimes we do lose it. That doesn't make the person a irreligious person. It just means that this person is misguided somehow to think that Judaism doesn't pertain to human relations, to ethics and morality, just like there were Jews who think that Judaism is only about being nice to people, but it has nothing to do with what our relationship with God. When God gave us the 10 Commandments, so-called 10 Commandments, He put it on 2 tablets. One tablet is our relationship with God, and one is our relationship with our fellow. And the 2 go together. They were given side by side. Yes.
Like I've thought a lot about this, about different names for God, but I have no framework in Judaism. But I think of God as like a great accountant, so that all our deeds and all that we do and our intentions, thought, actions,
right? It's all registered,
are all accounted. So when we don't repay someone or we don't pay someone that we owe, it's accounted for and comes to us in lessons in other ways that we may not even see because we don't have that perspective.
Right. I know this. It has to do with human nature as well. I know people who borrowed money. I know of people who borrowed money, and they came on hard times, and they would not want to pay it, and they would try to hide. And when they would see the creditor going down the street, they would cross the street so they shouldn't bump into them. And their problem is that they're misguided, because if they would just say to the person, you know what, it's hard for me to pay, I'll pay you a little. I owe you $1,000, I'll give you $10 now. And I'll try to give you another $10 in a week. I'll try to pay it little by little. In that way, you show that you're not trying to run away from your obligation. But somehow, psychologically, people feel $10 is nothing. I owe $1,000, so I better just ignore it and run away from it. That's a warped way of thinking, but that unfortunately we have.
I think a better way is, if you know you can't afford it, just say in a nice way, look, I really need some help. I can't afford to pay you. Can you help me? instead saying
Right,
something
right.
else and doing something.
So people just don't think straight, and they feel it's easier to just ignore it and escape and run away from it and hide. The last category is the person who says he himself should not give and that others should not give. That's obvious that that's wicked. A person who doesn't want to give, but also doesn't want others to give, because it makes him look bad. If everyone else gives and I don't give, I'm going to look bad, so I don't want anyone to give. But I saw in a commentary, he gives a little bit of a different twist over here. He says as follows. In the Talmud, there's a expression about a person who gives tzedakah in an evil way. How could that be? In biblical times, when people would collect the different gleanings, the different produce that was left out for the poor, how poor do you have to be for you to collect those gleanings, those produce? So if you had 200 zuz, let's call a zuz $1. You had $200, you couldn't collect. Because you have enough money, leave it for those who are really poor. So what happens if you have $199 and there's $1,000 worth of produce? You could take it all because you're considered poor. But once you have 200, you can't even take a penny's worth. So what happens if someone has 199 and I see has 199 and I see there's a big pile of produce and I want to leave, I want my friends to get it. I don't want him to get it. So what I do, here, I want to give you $1. And now he has 200. He can't collect that. So I'm giving tzedakah, but I really don't want to give. The reason I'm giving it is so he shouldn't be able to collect and that nobody else, and no one else could be able to give him because he's no longer a poor person. That's a devious wickedness. You're giving charity in a way to harm the person. Or it's maybe modern times, if you give someone money and you put them in a higher tax bracket. So you're giving them something, but you're actually taking something from them. So that's the example of a person who doesn't give and doesn't want others to give. But the simple meaning of that is you're not interested in giving and you don't want to look bad, so you tell everyone else not to give, and you find excuses. It's very easy to find excuses. Well, maybe this person is a fraudulent person, and that happens very often, that there are fraudulent charities. And unless you have the time and the means to investigate every charity, you can't give everyone. But someone who doesn't give anyone because everyone is cheating, everyone is trying to take my money, I'm not going to give them. And I don't want others to give as well because I don't want it to look bad. That's a negative trait.
So how are you supposed to make a decision which one is good, which one is bad?
Charity navigator. Charity navigator.
You hire a person, you pay him $150,000 a year to investigate every charity.
Only a poor person or a rich person behind it?
Obviously, you can't, when beggars come into shuls in Brooklyn, you could be accosted by 20, 30 beggars.
Yeah.
Israel too.
Israel too, but I know in 770,
And you're waiting,
before you even get into the shul, especially if it's warm outside, you have several people who are asking for tzedakah, and then inside the shul, you're stopped at least a dozen, maybe more than that. So what a lot of people do is they give a quarter, they give a small amount. They're not going to investigate which of those people are telling the truth, which ones are imposters. But you have to realize that anyone who sits outside all day long asking for coins or a dollar bill, they're not well.
Yeah, you can be rich out of that.
But they're not well. They're not well.
They're out there all day. You can give them a
I told the story 100 times that when I was a student in yeshiva, we used to get these beggars. One beggar would come and I would give him a nickel. A nickel, and this is 60 years ago. A nickel was like $1 today. Then I was sent by the Rebbe to Australia for 2 years. And at the end of my 2 years, it's the day before Purim, I'm walking down the street and I see someone in the distance and I'm talking to my friend. He says, he looks very familiar. Where did I see him? I said, doesn't he look like the beggar who used to come and collect a nickel from me? And sure enough, he goes over to me and extends his hand and asks for a donation.
In Australia?
in Australia.
Oh, my God.
Then a few months later, I'm back in Brooklyn, I'm back in yeshiva, and who do I see? I see this man. I said, were you in Australia a few months ago? And he said, yeah, he was. Then those days it was about $1,500 to $2,000 around, one-way ticket to Australia. It's much more than today, and people to
That's
afford.
a very unusual affinity. That's an unusual relationship you had with him. He followed you there.
He didn't follow just me. I mean, so, was it a mitzvah to give him? Probably not. But it was before Purim, so it was different. Purim, it says when someone stretches out his hand, you give. You don't ask questions. That's just Purim. But the rest of the year, you could ask questions but if you don't have the time to ask questions, just give a nickel, give a dime, give a quarter, give something.
Is it ever permissible to say no? If you haven't investigated, is it permissible to say
If you don't have the money on you, you have no choice. You could say no. Or if, let's say you just gave, and if you don't really have, you could say no. But it's...
How about if somebody give you, you give them, and then they say, no, that's not enough.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Money you gave them back.
That's happened.
I think
It happened many times. It happens, sure.
I mean, in Israel, this is unbelievable.
In the Karim, in the kever, in the
Yeah, a lot of-
memorial, when you go to visit the big rabbis,
Yeah.
there are people waiting inside with
Like
their
you said, there's
children,
so many-
babies, begging you. And if you give them, sometimes they look and they are not happy. And then you say, what's not enough? And they say no. And you don't know what to say. And
Like
how
you
to-
said, in 770, there's so many people, you can't give everybody
Send them
dollars.
to Australia.
One thing I do is that when people come to ask me and I have no money or I don't want to give, I say, I can only offer you blessings. I can only pray for you. That often, almost always, people are seen and validated and go the other way.
But also there's another issue, especially in big cities. People don't need the money for food, they need it for drugs.
Yeah, this is always true.
And someone told me he once had a beggar in Manhattan ask for money. So he said, I'll give you a sandwich. So he gives him a sandwich. Apparently he had a sandwich on him, and the man takes it and just throws it down. They didn't want the food, they wanted the money for drugs. In that case, there's a mitzvah not to give. If you have a suspicion that they're going to use it for drugs or alcohol, then you're only helping them.
I
do
did that one time for someone. I went and took them grocery shopping and bought them enough for 2 weeks, and they were back out begging for money
Right.
hours later. I mean,
Right, it happened. Someone I knew was going around collecting. I thought he was collecting for someone else, to help. There are people who collect for others, and they do this full time, and they raise big money to help poor people all over. So I thought this guy was doing that, and then I discovered that he was using it for drugs. He got caught up with drugs, and now he's in prison. And he called me from prison for a donation.
Go visit him?
What?
You get the mitzvah to go visit him?
That's a separate mitzvah. They can't mix the two.
do you know what the percentage of population of the Jewish population in prison is generally?
There's a lot of discrimination. There's too few Jews in prison. Thank God. Thank God they're underrepresented. Yes, but unfortunately, every Jew who's in prison is a tragedy.
Yeah.
It's a
People
tragedy.
who claim to be Jewish so they can get the kosher meals.
That's also true.
That's not only for the kosher meals. For some reason, I went to a prison a few months ago for Sukkot, and the 20 people showed up. Only one was really Jewish, and I didn't serve them any food.
You didn't?
No, they don't allow us to bring food in. They used to allow it, they're not anymore. But they just came to learn about the holiday, to make the blessing on the lulav and the etrog. And they came and they were just interested in hearing me talk. So there's a certain interest, a certain romanticism in being Jewish. Even if you don't get, and the kosher meals, the only advantage they have is that they know they come sealed, so no one tampered with the food.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, they sometimes suspect that the guards or the other inmates spit into the food, which is not out of the question. Things like that could happen.
Flavor.
But the food is much,
Some kind of-
the kosher food is nothing to write home about.
Not especially those,
So if anyone wants to go kosher food in prison and they commit a crime to get that, it's a bad deal.
Imagine what the non-kosher food is like.
Well, the non-kosher food is made on the premises. Here it's packaged.
fresh.
The reason why I asked about Jewish population in prison is because I have a nonprofit now. I established a nonprofit, it's incorporated nonprofit, and the two areas that I work with is homelessness, and I work with returning people from incarceration back into the community. And so I was wondering if there were specifically Jews that I might be able to work with to help them acclimate back into the community.
Yes, there definitely are. My son Levi is a chaplain in a few prisons, so he would have.
I'll reach out to them.
He might have some names of people that could be helped. There's a law that if you're a prison employee, like a chaplain, you can't communicate with prisoners after they're released, which is a very bad law, I think.
You mean it's an American law?
Yeah, in New York State at least, and probably in other places as well. So if you're a rabbi in prison, chaplain, you're helping,
Yeah.
you're counseling that person, and then when he gets out, and he still needs counseling,
Right.
more than before even,
Yeah.
to maintain his freedom,
Yeah.
they don't allow you to,
What's
Yeah,
the
that
reason?
seems- There's no reason to it. There could be no reason for that. That just
Let 'em
doesn't make
private-
sense.
Let them commit another crime and go back again. They can
yeah,
do with the rest.
that's what happens, unfortunately. That's what happens. You know, I got in trouble once as a volunteer chaplain. One of the inmates wanted to know the birthdays of my children, so he could send me a birthday card to show appreciation for my coming to the prisons. And
Sure.
well, they once did a search of his cell and they found that list. And the deputy superintendent calls me and says, if you do this again, you'll be thrown out of the prison. So I like to brag that I was almost thrown out of jail.
Why
It's
is
so
that bad?
dehumanizing. Our prison system.
They
is so
didn't want
dehumanizing.
anyone to have any,
Connection.
it sounded like that it was for my protection. You don't want to have them know where you live. And
Okay.
so I was very innocent. I was saying the person wanted to show some appreciation. I was doing him a favor. I wasn't doing it because my kids needed a card from him, but it was just to show him that we care for him and we appreciate his appreciation. So, but they didn't buy that.
A lot of problems with our prison system because it totally dehumanizes people and it doesn't rehabilitate them,
Right,
teach them
right.
skills. Yeah.
Did you remember all your children's birthdays?
What?
Did you remember all your children's birthdays?
I probably asked Leah.
What is it with you?
Any questions on Zoom? Okay, everyone have a good day and a good week.
You have a very interesting.
Yeah, Debbie, we got a comedian already.
Next
Thank you,
week,
Rabbi. Have a good day, and everyone.
next week there will not be a class on Wednesday. I'm going to be out of town.